Matthew White,
Mark Simmons,
Christina Simmons,
Jeff Simmons.
Kathy Couch.
I'm sure we've all heard of, or maybe even been in a situation where you wanted to go and hang out with some friends, but your parents said no. You really wanted to go and hang out with them, but for whatever reason, your parents just wouldn't budge. So you did the next best thing. You snuck out. Pretty simple situation that almost all of us have heard of before, but like this simple situation, there's a similar one that's much more complicated. Illegal immigration into the US. I'm Christopher White, and today we'll be talking about how tightening immigration laws leads to higher amounts of illegal immigration. I'm qualified to speak on this subject as I've done extensive research on it, as well as consulted an expert in the immigration law, an expert immigration attorney. We'll cover 3 main points today. The first one is there's no realistic way for many people to immigrate into the US. The second one is the enforcement of laws is not the same as the creation of laws. And the third one is it is much less common to see people illegally immigrate into the US prior to the tightening of immigration laws. To start, let's talk about how immigration, there is no way for people to realistically immigrate into the US. In an interview with Matthew White, an immigration attorney who's worked in the field for 20 plus years, he stated that the immigration reform that occurred under President Ronald Reagan effectively closed the door for 99% of the world. Essentially, what he's saying is that after the 1986 Reform Act, people could no longer immigrate to the US realistically and had to immigrate illegally. This is highlighted by the immigrationhelp.org report stating that of the 1% of people allowed to immigrate into the US, 23% are approved for permanent residency, 3% are denied, and 70% are left pending or effectively denied. And of the small 1% allowed into the US, only 23% are allowed permanent residency. Next, let's talk about how even though Congress makes laws to tighten the immigration status of the US, they do not provide law enforcement resources to enforce these laws. This is highlighted by the story of Karina Gardner. Karina was a Mexican citizen who prior to 1986 was able to freely go between US and Mexico. When the 1986 Reform Act was enacted, she was in Mexico and was effectively stuck there. So what her parents did to get her back into the US was put her into the backseat of their car and drive across the border. This highlights that even though the new laws were enacted, law enforcement did not have proper resources to enforce them. This is also highlighted by the report of Fox News that states in the last 4 months, 300,000 people have illegally immigrated into the US, which is reaching historical numbers, even though immigration laws have not changed for the past 20 years. Compared to the current numbers or current statistics, we have statistics prior to 1986, which are much smaller numbers. Chuck Cook stated that, who was an immigration attorney who practiced prior to the 1986 Reform Act, stated that it was rare to see illegal immigration prior to the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act. And this is highlighted in the USCIS.gov statement saying that 3 million people illegally resided in the US prior to 1986. By 2007, that number had more than quadrupled to 12.4 million people illegally residing in the US. Excuse me. In conclusion, to recap, the information that we've gone over so far, The first point was that there's no way for many people to realistically immigrate to the US. The second point was that the creation of laws is not the same as the enforcement of laws. And the third is that it was much less common to see people illegally immigrate to the US prior to 1986. I hope that based off the information presented to you today, that you can see that tightening immigration laws leads to a higher amount of illegal immigration, and that having redundant or unnecessary laws won't always fix problems, but can cause more. Thank you.